I flew to Texas without telling my son. When I arrived, there was a sign on the door, Honeymoon, do not disturb. When I confronted my daughter-in-law, she said, a ceremony for only 800 people, only the most important ones. So I decided to freeze their bank accounts. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. I never imagined that a mother's love could be so easily discarded. At 63, I thought I understood heartbreak. I'd buried my husband when Miles was only 12, raised him alone through his teenage rebellions, put him through college working double shifts at the diner. I thought losing Robert was the worst pain I'd ever endure. I was wrong. The Texas heat hit me like a wall when I stepped off the plane at Dallas-Fort Worth. My hands trembled as I fumbled with my phone, trying to call an Uber. Miles didn't know I was coming. That was the whole point. Tomorrow was his 35th birthday, and I wanted to surprise him. I'd been planning this trip for months, saving every extra dollar from my part-time job at the local library. The flight had been my first in over 10 years. I'd gripped the armrest during takeoff, my stomach churning with excitement and nerves. The woman next to me had smiled kindly when she noticed my white knuckles. First time flying? She'd asked. I'd nodded, too embarrassed to admit it wasn't fear of flying that had me so worked up. It was the fear that maybe, just maybe, I was being foolish. That maybe a mother shouldn't show up unannounced at her adult son's doorstep. But Miles was all I had left. Since Robert died, it had been just the two of us against the world. Sure, we didn't talk as much as we used to. He was busy building his consulting business in Austin, and I understood that. Young men needed space to grow, to become the men they were meant to be. That's what I kept telling myself when our weekly phone calls became monthly, then sporadic. The Uber driver was chatty, pointing out landmarks as we drove through Austin. I barely heard him. My mind was racing with all the things I wanted to tell Miles. How proud I was of everything he'd accomplished. How much I missed our Sunday morning pancake breakfasts. How the house felt too quiet without his laughter echoing through the halls. I'd brought his favorite chocolate chip cookies, the ones I used to pack in his lunchbox every day until he graduated high school. The recipe had been my mother's, passed down through 3 generations. The same cookies that had soothed scraped knees and broken hearts throughout his childhood. They were in my carry-on bag, carefully wrapped in the same blue tin I'd used for 20 years. When we pulled up to his apartment complex, my heart was hammering against my ribs. The building was nice, modern, with clean lines and well-maintained landscaping. I felt a surge of maternal pride. My boy had done well for himself. The sacrifices had been worth it. I paid the driver and stood on the sidewalk for a moment, gathering my courage. The early evening air carried the scent of barbecue from somewhere nearby, and I could hear children playing in the courtyard. It felt like home, the kind of place where families were built and memories were made. I climbed the stairs to the second floor, my overnight bag feeling heavier with each step. Apartment 2B. I'd memorized the address from the return labels on his Christmas cards. My hand was raised to knock when I saw it, a piece of paper taped to the door, handwritten in elegant script that definitely wasn't Miles's messy scrawl. Honeymoon, do not disturb. The words hit me like a physical blow. I read them again, certain I'd misunderstood. Honeymoon. The paper crinkled in my shaking hands as I stared at those 2 simple words that changed everything. Miles was married. My son, my only child, the boy I'd raised alone, had gotten married without telling me. Without inviting me, without even mentioning he was engaged. I sank onto the nearby bench in the hallway, the overnight bag slipping from my numb fingers, the cookies scattered across the floor, some spilling from their careful wrapping. I stared at them, these symbols of a mother's love, now broken and forgotten on the cold concrete. When had he gotten engaged? How long had he been planning this? Had he stood at an altar, promising to love and cherish someone forever, while his own mother sat 3 states away? Completely unaware that the most important day of his life was happening without her? My chest felt tight, like someone had wrapped steel bands around my lungs. I couldn't breathe properly, couldn't think straight. The hallway seemed to spin around me as the reality settled in like poison in my veins. I wasn't just excluded from his wedding, I was erased from it entirely. The girl next door poked her head out, probably wondering about the commotion. She looked at me with that particular mixture of pity and curiosity that I'd grown to hate since Robert died. "You okay, honey?" she asked. I forced a smile, the kind I'd perfected over the years. "I'm fine, dear. Just dropping something off for my son." But I wasn't fine. I was the furthest thing from fine that a person could be. I gathered up the broken cookies, my hands moving automatically while my mind reeled. Each crumb felt like another piece of my heart breaking away. These cookies had been meant to celebrate his birthday, to bridge the growing distance between us. Instead, they were a pathetic reminder of how little I knew about my own son's life. As I stood there in that sterile hallway, clutching the remnants of my surprise visit, I realized something that cut deeper than the exclusion itself. Miles hadn't just forgotten to invite me to his wedding. He'd actively chosen not to tell me about it. This wasn't an oversight. This was deliberate. The mother who had worked 3 jobs to pay for his college, who had sold her wedding ring to buy him his first car, who had cheered at every soccer game and graduation ceremony, wasn't important enough to witness the day he chose his life partner. I was nothing to him now. Nothing at all. The paper on the door fluttered slightly in the air-conditioning breeze, and I noticed something else. Fresh flowers in a vase by the door, wedding favors scattered on a side table I hadn't noticed before. They'd just returned from their honeymoon. This wasn't even their wedding day. This was their return to married life, and I was still discovering it by accident. My legs felt weak as I made my way back down the stairs. Each step echoed in the stairwell, a hollow sound that matched the emptiness spreading through my chest. The Uber app trembled in my hands as I tried to call another ride back to the airport. But where would I go? Back to my empty house in Kansas? Back to the job that barely paid the bills? To the life that suddenly felt meaningless? I sat on the curb outside Miles' building, my suitcase beside me like a faithful dog, and let the tears come. They were the kind of tears that come from a place so deep you didn't even know it existed. The kind that tastes like 23 years of single motherhood, of sacrifice, of believing that love was enough to keep a family together. The Texas sky was turning pink and orange, painting the world in colors that should have been beautiful. But all I could see was that piece of paper, those cruel words that had shattered everything I thought I knew about my relationship with my son. Honeymoon. Do not disturb. Don't disturb the happy couple. Don't disturb their new life. Don't disturb them with the inconvenient presence of the woman who gave up everything to raise him. As I sat there watching the sunset, I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going home. Not yet. I was going to wait right here until Miles came back from wherever he was. And then, for the first time in my life, I was going to demand answers from the son I'd loved unconditionally for 35 years. Because sometimes, the people who love us the most are the ones who deserve explanations the least. And I was tired of being taken for granted by the only family I had left. I waited 3 hours on that curb before I saw them. Miles's burgundy Honda pulled into the parking lot just as the streetlights flickered on, casting long shadows across the pavement. My heart started racing the moment I recognized his laugh drifting through the evening air. That same laugh that had filled our house for 18 years, now shared with a stranger. She was beautiful in that effortless way that young women can be. Long blonde hair cascading over one shoulder, designer sunglasses perched on her head despite the fading light. Even from a distance, I could see she was everything I wasn't. Young, polished, the kind of woman who had never worked a double shift in her life. They were carrying shopping bags, laughing about something private between them. The kind of intimate moment that newlyweds share, completely absorbed in their bubble of happiness. I watched my son help her out of the car, his hand gentle on her back, and felt another piece of my heart crack. This was how he should be caring for someone. This was the man I'd raised him to become. But watching it happen with a woman I'd never met, in a life I'd been systematically excluded from, felt like watching a stranger wear my son's face. I stood up slowly, my legs stiff from sitting on the concrete. My overnight bag felt heavier than ever as I walked toward them. Each step felt like walking through quicksand, my body fighting against what my mind knew I had to do. Miles? My voice came out smaller than I'd intended, barely carrying across the parking lot. He froze. Actually froze mid-step, like someone had pressed pause on his entire body. The woman beside him looked confused, her head tilting as she tried to understand why her husband had suddenly turned to stone. "Mom?" The word came out like a question, like he wasn't quite sure I was real. "What are you doing here?" Before I could answer, the woman stepped forward. She was even more striking up close, with green eyes that reminded me of a cat. Beautiful, but calculating. "You must be Colleen," she said, her voice honey-sweet but somehow cold. "I'm Bellamy." She didn't extend her hand, didn't smile, just stood there looking at me like I was an unexpected problem that needed to be managed. "I came to surprise Miles for his birthday tomorrow," I said, my voice getting stronger. "Imagine my surprise when I found that note on your door." Miles ran a hand through his hair, the same nervous gesture he'd had since childhood. "Mom, we were going to call you. We just got back from Cabo and—" "Cabo?" The word slipped out before I could stop it. They'd honeymooned in Cabo San Lucas, probably spent more money in a week than I made in 6 months. While I'd been sitting at home wondering why my son hadn't called, Bellamy's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. It was absolutely divine. The resort was incredible right on the beach. 5 stars, of course. She paused, letting that sink in. We had the most beautiful wedding. Small ceremony, very exclusive. Just 800 of our closest friends and family. 800 people. 800 people had been invited to my son's wedding, and I wasn't one of them. 800? I repeated, my voice barely a whisper. "Well, yes," Bellamy continued, her tone growing more condescending with each word. "We only invited the most important people in our lives. You understand? The most important people." I looked at Miles, waiting for him to say something, anything, to soften the blow his wife had just delivered. But he just stood there, shopping bags in his hands, looking everywhere except at me. "I don't understand," I said finally. "I don't understand how the woman who raised him alone for 23 years doesn't qualify as important." Bellamy's laugh was like breaking glass. "Oh, honey, I think you're misunderstanding. Miles has told me all about his childhood, how hard it was, growing up without a father figure, how much responsibility he had to take on because—" She paused, her eyes scanning me from head to toe. "Because you couldn't handle things on your own." The words hit me like a slap. I felt my face flush with a mixture of embarrassment and rage. "I worked 3 jobs to put him through college." "Yes, he mentioned that too. How exhausted you always were. How he had to grow up so fast because someone had to be the adult in the house." Bellamy's voice dripped with false sympathy. It must have been so hard for him, having to parent his own parent. I looked at Miles again, desperate for him to correct her, to tell her she was wrong. To tell her about the soccer games I never missed, the birthday parties I threw with decorations I made by hand because we couldn't afford store-bought ones. To tell her about the nights I held him when he cried about missing his father, the way I'd sing him to sleep even when I was dead on my feet from working double shifts. But he didn't say any of that. He just shifted his weight from one foot to the other and said, "Mom, maybe we should go inside and talk about this." "Oh, I don't think that's necessary," Bellamy interjected smoothly. "We just got back from our trip and we're exhausted. Besides, Miles and I have dinner reservations tonight. Our first night back should be about us, don't you think?" Us. She kept saying us like it was a weapon, like she was drawing a line in the sand and making it clear which side of it I stood on. "Miles," I said, my voice breaking despite my efforts to stay strong. "Can we please just talk? Just the 2 of us?" For a moment, I thought he might say yes. I saw something flicker in his eyes. Maybe guilt. Maybe the memory of all those years when it was just him and me against the world. But then Bellamy linked her arm through his, and whatever I'd seen disappeared. "Actually, Mom, Bellamy's right. We're pretty tired and we do have plans tonight. Maybe we could catch up later this week." Later this week. Like I was a casual acquaintance he needed to squeeze into his busy schedule. Like I was someone who could just wait around indefinitely for whatever scraps of attention he felt like throwing my way. "I flew here from Kansas, Miles. I took time off work. I brought your favorite cookies." I gestured helplessly at my overnight bag. "I just wanted to see you for your birthday." Bellamy's perfectly shaped eyebrows rose. "You flew here without telling us you were coming? That's a bit presumptuous, don't you think?" Presumptuous. As if a mother visiting her son was some kind of social transgression. "I thought he'd be happy to see me," I said quietly. "Well, maybe next time you should call first," Bellamy said, her tone suggesting there wouldn't be a next time if she had anything to say about it. "We're married now. Our privacy is important to us." Miles finally looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw something in his expression that broke my heart all over again. Embarrassment. He was embarrassed of me, of my worn jacket and my drugstore purse and my obvious desperation to be part of his life. "Where are you staying tonight?" he asked, and even that felt like a dismissal. "I don't know," I admitted. I hoped I could stay with you, like old times." The silence that followed was deafening. Bellamy's smile was so cold it could have frozen hell over. "Oh, I'm sorry, but that won't be possible," she said sweetly. "We're still in our honeymoon phase, you know. We need our space." She paused, pretending to think. "There's a nice motel about 10 minutes from here. Very clean, very affordable." A motel. She was suggesting I stay in a motel rather than spend one night on my son's couch. That's when I realized this wasn't just about being excluded from a wedding. This was about being erased from Miles's life entirely. Bellamy wasn't just his wife. She was his gatekeeper, deciding who was worthy of his time and attention. And I had been deemed unworthy. I picked up my bag, my hands shaking with hurt and humiliation. "Happy birthday, Miles," I said, my voice barely audible. "I hope your new life is everything you dreamed it would be." I turned to walk away, but Bellamy's voice stopped me. "Oh, and Colleen? Next time you want to visit, maybe call first. We wouldn't want another awkward situation like this." As I walked back to the curb to call another Uber, I heard their apartment door close behind me with a finality that echoed through my bones. I sat down on my suitcase and stared at that door, at the little welcome mat I now noticed was new, at the life my son had built without me. But as I sat there in the growing darkness, something shifted inside me. The hurt was still there, sharp and raw, but underneath it was something else, something harder, something that tasted like 23 years of sacrifice and felt like the steel I'd found in my spine when Robert died and I had to raise a child alone. They thought they could dismiss me like I was nothing, like I was just some inconvenient remnant of Miles's past that could be swept aside now that he had a shiny new life. But they didn't know me at all. They didn't know what I was capable of when pushed too far. And Bellamy had just pushed me way too far. I didn't go to the motel that night. Instead, I sat in the 24-hour diner across from Miles's apartment complex, nursing cup after cup of coffee and staring at his building through the window. The waitress, a woman about my age with kind eyes and tired feet, kept refilling my mug without asking questions. She understood heartbreak when she saw it. At some point around midnight, I pulled out my phone and started scrolling through my banking app. It was a habit I developed after Robert died, checking our accounts obsessively in those early days when every dollar mattered. When raising a child alone meant choosing between groceries and the electric bill, that's when I saw it. Miles' business account, the one I'd helped him set up 5 years ago when he was starting his consulting firm, the one where I was still listed as a co-signer. I'd forgotten about it, honestly. When Miles asked me to co-sign back then, he was just getting his business off the ground and needed someone with established credit to vouch for him. I'd been so proud, so honored that he trusted me enough to involve me in his dreams. It felt like being needed again, like I still had a role to play in his success. The account had grown substantially since then. What started as a small business checking account now showed a balance that made my breath catch. 6 figures. Miles had done very well for himself, better than I'd ever imagined. But what really caught my attention was the recent activity. Large withdrawals over the past 2 months. Wedding expenses, I realized. The venue, the catering, the honeymoon to Cabo. All of it funded by the account I was still legally authorized to access. I stared at the screen, my coffee growing cold in my hands. Miles had spent a fortune on a wedding that excluded me entirely, using an account I'd helped him establish. The irony was almost laughable if it wasn't so painful. The diner was mostly empty now, just a few truckers grabbing late-night meals, and a couple of college students studying over plates of pie. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in that harsh, honest light that makes truth impossible to avoid. I thought about Bellamy's words, playing them over in my mind like a song I couldn't get out of my head. Only the most important people. Very affordable motel. Maybe call first next time. She'd dismissed me like I was nothing, like I was some pathetic old woman clinging to a relationship that no longer existed. And maybe that's exactly what I was. Maybe that's what I'd become without even realizing it. But as I sat there looking at that bank account, I realized something Bellamy didn't know, something that might change the balance of power in this little family drama she thought she was directing. I wasn't just Miles's mother. I wasn't just some inconvenient relic from his past. I was his business partner, at least legally speaking, and business partners have rights that dismissed mothers don't. My hands were steadier now as I navigated through the banking app. The freeze account option was right there, requiring just 2 clicks and my digital signature. It would stop all transactions immediately, freezing every penny until the matter could be resolved. I hesitated for a moment, my finger hovering over the screen. This wasn't just about money. This was about sending a message. This was about making sure that the woman who'd treated me like garbage understood that I wasn't as powerless as she thought. But it was also about Miles, my son, who I'd raised to be better than this, who I'd taught to respect his elders, to honor the people who'd sacrificed for him. The boy who used to make me breakfast in bed on Mother's Day, bringing me burnt toast and orange juice with too much pulp because he was trying so hard to show he cared. The waitress came by again, her orthopedic shoes squeaking softly on the linoleum. "You doing okay, honey? You've been sitting here for hours." I looked up at her, this stranger who'd shown me more kindness in one night than my own daughter-in-law had managed in our entire encounter. "I'm trying to figure out how to handle a family situation," I said. She glanced out the window toward the apartment complex. "Sometimes family is the hardest thing we have to deal with," she said quietly. "They know exactly how to hurt us because they know exactly where we're vulnerable." Her words hit home harder than she probably intended. That's exactly what this was about. Vulnerability. I'd made myself vulnerable by loving Miles unconditionally, by sacrificing everything for him, by believing that blood ties meant something in this world. But vulnerability could be a two-way street. I clicked the freeze account button. The confirmation screen appeared, asking if I was sure I wanted to proceed. I thought about Miles helping Bellamy out of the car, the way he'd looked at her like she hung the moon. I thought about him standing there silent while she humiliated me, too much of a coward to defend the woman who'd given up everything for him. I clicked confirm. The account was frozen immediately. All access suspended pending review. It would take at least 72 hours to resolve, assuming Miles could prove he had legitimate business need for the funds and could provide proper documentation. I closed the app and finished my coffee, feeling something I hadn't felt in years: power. For the first time since arriving in Texas, I wasn't just reacting to what was being done to me. I was taking action. My phone buzzed with a text message. Miles. "Hope you found a place to stay. Sorry about tonight. Bellamy's just protective of our relationship. I'll call you tomorrow and we can talk." Protective of their relationship, as if I was some kind of threat to their marital bliss. As if a mother wanting to be part of her son's life was something that needed to be defended against. I typed back, "Don't worry about calling. I think we've said everything we need to say." But even as I sent the message, I knew this was far from over. Tomorrow, when they tried to use their credit cards or access their bank accounts, they'd discover that their perfect little bubble had a leak, and they'd realize that the unimportant woman they'd dismissed so casually had more influence over their lives than they'd ever imagined. I gathered my things and walked out into the Texas night. The air was still warm, carrying the scent of honeysuckle and barbecue smoke. Somewhere in the distance, a train whistle blew, long and lonesome, like a sound from my childhood in Kansas. I checked into the motel Bellamy had so graciously recommended. It was exactly what I'd expected, clean but tired, the kind of place where people stayed when they had nowhere else to go. The clerk was watching an old movie on a small TV behind the counter, and she barely looked up when I slid my credit card across the Formica surface. The room smelled like industrial disinfectant and other people's disappointments. I sat on the edge of the bed, my purse in my lap, and tried to process what I'd just done. I'd frozen my son's business account. I'd essentially cut off his access to his own money, at least temporarily. A year ago, even a week ago, the thought would have horrified me. But sitting in that motel room, I felt nothing but a cold satisfaction. They wanted to treat me like I didn't matter? Fine. Now they'd learn exactly how much I mattered. My phone rang. Miles. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again and again. Finally, I turned it off altogether. Whatever panic was setting in across the parking lot at apartment 2B could wait until morning. Let them stew in it for a while. Let them wonder what the crazy old lady might do next. Because the truth was, I was just getting started. Bellamy thought she could play games with someone she saw as weak and desperate. She thought she could humiliate me and send me scurrying back to Kansas with my tail between my legs, but she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd underestimated the woman who'd raised a son alone for 23 years, the woman who'd fought school boards and insurance companies and debt collectors, the woman who'd stared down poverty and won. That woman wasn't weak. That woman was a survivor. And survivors don't go down without a fight. As I lay in the unfamiliar bed, listening to the hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of traffic on the interstate, I smiled for the first time since arriving in Texas. Tomorrow was going to be very interesting. Tomorrow, Bellamy was going to discover that dismissing Colleen Harper was the biggest mistake she'd ever made. I was having breakfast at the same diner when my phone started ringing. I'd turned it back on at 7 in the morning, curious to see how long it would take them to discover their little financial problem. The answer, apparently, was about 3 hours. The first call came at 7:47 a.m. Miles. I let it ring. The second call came 2 minutes later. Miles again. Then again at 7:52. By 8:15, my phone had buzzed with 6 missed calls and 4 increasingly frantic text messages. Mom, call me back. There's some kind of problem with my account. Mom, this is serious. My cards aren't working. Mom, call me now. What did you do? I ordered another cup of coffee and a slice of apple pie. The same waitress from last night was working the morning shift, and she gave me a knowing look when she saw me checking my phone. Family still giving you trouble? She asked. Oh, they're just now realizing they have trouble, I said, taking a bite of pie. It was good, tart and sweet in all the right proportions. Sometimes people need a wake-up call. At 8:30, a number I didn't recognize appeared on my screen. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. Is this Colleen Harper? The voice was crisp, professional, unfamiliar. Yes, who's asking? This is Janet from First National Bank. I have Miles Harper here with me, and there seems to be some confusion about his business account. He's listed you as an authorized signer, and we need to verify some recent activity. I could hear voices in the background, one of them definitely Miles, sounding agitated. Put him on the phone, I said. Mom, Miles' voice was tight with panic. What's going on? They're saying the account is frozen and that you initiated it? That's correct, I said calmly, cutting another piece of pie. But why? I don't understand. Is this about last night? Because if you're upset... Upset? I interrupted, keeping my voice level. Miles, I flew halfway across the country to see my only child on his birthday, only to discover he'd gotten married without even telling me. Then his wife suggested I stay in a motel because I wasn't important enough to sleep on your couch. So yes, you could say I'm upset. Silence on the other end. Then, Mom, please. I have payroll due tomorrow. I have contractors waiting for payments. You can't just freeze my business accounts because your feelings are hurt. My feelings are hurt. Like I was a child having a tantrum instead of a woman who'd been systematically erased from her son's life. I can and I did, I said. The account requires both signatures for major transactions, remember? You wanted me as a co-signer when you needed good credit. Well, now you have a co-signer who expects to be treated with basic respect. What do you want? The question came out sharp, desperate. What did I want? That was the million-dollar question, wasn't it? I wanted my son back. I wanted the boy who used to call me every Sunday just to chat. I wanted to matter in his life again. But I couldn't say any of that with half the bank listening in. I want to have a conversation, I said finally. A real conversation. Just you and me, without your wife managing every word that comes out of your mouth. Another long pause. Okay, yes. Where do you want to meet? The diner across from your apartment. 1 hour. I hung up before he could argue. But Miles wasn't the first one to show up. At 9:25, 5 minutes before our scheduled meeting, Bellamy burst through the diner's front door like a tornado in designer jeans. She scanned the room until her eyes locked on mine, and I could practically see the fury radiating off her in waves. She marched over to my booth, her high heels clicking on the linoleum like gunshots. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" she hissed, sliding into the seat across from me without invitation. "Having breakfast?" I said, not looking up from my newspaper. "The pancakes here are excellent." "Don't play games with me, you bitter old woman. You froze Miles' account because you're jealous that he has a life that doesn't revolve around you." I set down my newspaper and looked at her properly. She was beautiful, I'd give her that. But this morning her perfection was cracked around the edges. Her makeup was hastily applied, her hair not quite as perfectly styled as yesterday, and her eyes. Her eyes were wild with the kind of panic that comes when your carefully constructed world starts to crumble. "I'm not playing games, Bellamy. I'm exercising my legal rights as a co-signer on that account." "Legal rights?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You're blackmailing your own son because he didn't invite you to his wedding. That's pathetic even for you." "Pathetic," I repeated, testing the word. "You know what's pathetic? A grown woman who's so insecure about her marriage that she has to isolate her husband from his own mother." Her face flushed red. "I did no such thing. Miles made his own choices about the wedding." "Did he? Or did you convince him that his mother was somehow a threat to your relationship?" "You are a threat." The words exploded out of her before she could stop them. "You're possessive and needy, and you can't stand that Miles doesn't need you anymore." The diner had gone quiet around us. The waitress was pretending to clean the counter, but I could tell she was listening. The truckers at the corner booth had stopped talking. Even the cook had poked his head out of the kitchen, but I didn't care who was listening. This woman had declared war on me the moment she decided I wasn't important enough to include in my son's life. If she wanted to have this fight in public, so be it. "You're right about one thing," I said quietly. "Miles doesn't need me anymore. But that doesn't mean he gets to use me. And that's exactly what happened with that bank account. He needed my credit when it was convenient. But now that he has what he wants, I'm supposed to disappear quietly into the background. That's not, isn't it?" I leaned forward. "Tell me, Bellamy, what do you know about my relationship with Miles? What has he told you about his childhood?" She shifted uncomfortably. "He told me you were overwhelmed, that you worked too much and he had to grow up fast. And did he tell you why I work too much? Because his father died and left you with nothing. Did he tell you about the nights I stayed up helping him with homework even though I'd been on my feet for 12 hours? Did he tell you about the time I sold my wedding ring to buy him a car for his 16th birthday? Did he tell you that I turned down 3 different job opportunities in other cities because I didn't want to disrupt his senior year of high school?" Bellamy's silence was answer enough. "Did he tell you that I took out a second mortgage on my house to help pay for his college? Or that I've been sending him money every month for the past 5 years to help with his business expenses?" Her eyes widened. "What money?" $500 a month, direct deposit into his personal account. I've been doing it since he graduated college because I wanted to help him get established. I could see her processing this information, could see the wheels turning as she realized there were things about her husband's finances she didn't know, things he'd apparently never told her. "You're lying," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. I pulled out my phone and showed her my banking app, scrolling to the automatic transfer section. There it was, clear as day, monthly transfer to Miles Harper, $500, ongoing for 5 years, $60,000, I said. "That's how much I've given him since he graduated. Money that came out of my grocery budget, my savings, my retirement fund. Because that's what mothers do. We sacrifice for our children, even when they're adults, even when they don't ask for it." Bellamy stared at the screen, her face going pale. "He never said. I didn't know." "There's a lot you don't know about Miles, apparently. Just like there's a lot he doesn't know about you." She looked up sharply. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I did some research last night. Amazing what you can find online these days. Public records, social media, professional networks. You've been married before, haven't you, Bellamy? Divorced 2 years ago from a man who was also significantly older than you. Also financially successful." The color drained completely from her face. That has nothing to do with anything, doesn't it? Pattern recognition is a useful skill. Young woman, Older, successful man, whirlwind romance, quick marriage, and in both cases, the man's family mysteriously gets pushed out of the picture. You don't know what you're talking about, don't I? Tell me, how long after you started dating Miles did you begin suggesting that his relationship with me was unhealthy? How long before you convinced him that calling his mother every week was somehow inappropriate for a grown man? She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. You're crazy. You're a bitter, lonely old woman who can't accept that her son has moved on. Maybe, I said. But I'm a bitter, lonely old woman with access to his business accounts. And until I get the respect I deserve, those accounts stay frozen. Bellamy's hands were shaking now. You can't do this. Miles has employees. People depending on him. You're going to destroy his business over petty jealousy. Then maybe you should have thought about that before you decided I wasn't important enough to include in his life. She leaned down, her face inches from mine. If you don't unfreeze those accounts by this afternoon, I will make your life hell. I will make sure Miles never speaks to you again. I smiled up at her. The same sweet smile I'd given difficult customers at the diner all those years ago. Honey, you already tried that. And look how well it worked out for you. Miles walked in just as Bellamy was storming out, nearly colliding with her at the door. He looked haggard, like he'd aged 5 years overnight. His hair was messy, his clothes wrinkled, and he had the hollow-eyed look of a man who'd just realized his perfect life wasn't as perfect as he'd thought. He slid into the booth across from me, running his hands through his hair. Mom, please. We need to fix this. I looked at my son, this man I'd raised from a boy, and felt my heart break all over again. Because finally, he was looking at me like I mattered. It had just taken freezing his bank accounts to get his attention. Miles looked like a man who'd been hit by a truck. He sat across from me in that diner booth. His shoulders slumped, his usually confident demeanor completely shattered. The golden boy I'd raised, the successful businessman he'd become, was gone. In his place sat someone who looked lost and confused, like he was seeing the world clearly for the first time in months. Mom, he started, his voice hoarse. I need you to understand something. The wedding, it wasn't supposed to happen like that. I raised an eyebrow. Which part? The part where you didn't tell me you were engaged? Or the part where you didn't invite me? He flinched. Both. Neither. It's complicated. Uncomplicated. Miles rubbed his face with both hands, a gesture I remembered from his teenage years when he was trying to explain why he'd missed curfew or forgotten to do his chores. Bellamy said, She said you wouldn't approve of her, that you'd try to interfere. Interfere how? She said mothers-in-law always cause problems, that you'd try to control our relationship, make demands, create drama. He looked up at me with eyes that reminded me of the little boy he used to be. She said it would be better to start our marriage without any outside pressure. Outside pressure. Is that what I am now? No, that's not. God, Mom, I don't know anymore. He leaned back in the booth, staring at the ceiling. 6 months ago, everything made sense. Bellamy and I were happy. We were planning our future, and it all seemed so clear. But now what? Now I'm sitting here trying to figure out how I ended up married to someone I'm not sure I actually know. The waitress came by with the coffee pot, and I nodded for a refill. Miles declined, his hands already shaking enough without caffeine. When she walked away, I leaned forward. Tell me about the engagement. Miles was quiet for so long I thought he wasn't going to answer. Finally, he started talking, his voice soft and uncertain. It was fast, really fast. We'd only been dating for 8 months when she brought up marriage. She said she could see our whole future together, that waiting was just wasting time. And you agreed? I thought I was lucky. I thought I'd found someone who knew what she wanted and wasn't playing games. He laughed bitterly. She made all the wedding plans, said she wanted to handle everything so I could focus on work. I was grateful, actually. I hate planning events. But you didn't question excluding me? Miles looked down at his hands. She said you were going through a hard time, that you'd been calling too much, seemed lonely and needy. She thought it would be kinder to keep the wedding small and tell you afterward when everything was settled. I felt my breath catch. When did I call too much, Miles? When was I needy? She said. He paused, frowning. She said you'd been calling her directly, asking invasive questions about our relationship, trying to arrange visits without checking with us first. Miles. My voice was deadly quiet. I've never had Bellamy's phone number. I didn't even know her last name until yesterday. The color drained from his face. What? The only times I've tried to contact you in the past 6 months have been our regular monthly phone calls, which, by the way, you've cut short or skipped entirely 3 times. Miles stared at me like I was speaking a foreign language. But she showed me. She had screenshots of text messages from you, long, rambling messages about how you missed me and wanted to be more involved in our lives. Show me. I don't have them. They were on her phone. Miles, I don't text. You know that. I've never sent a text message longer than happy birthday in my entire life. The silence that followed was deafening. I could practically see the pieces clicking into place in his mind, could watch as months of manipulation unraveled in real time. She lied to me, he whispered, about that and probably a lot more. He pulled out his phone with trembling fingers. I need to see those messages again. Call her. Miles dialed Bellamy's number, putting the phone on speaker. She answered on the first ring. Miles? Did you fix it? Did you get your mother to stop this insane tantrum? Bellamy, I need you to send me those text messages from my mom again. The ones you showed me last month. A pause. Why? What does that matter right now? Just send them. Miles, we have bigger problems. Your business accounts are frozen. We can't access our money, and your psychotic mother is... Send me the messages, Bellamy. Another pause. Longer this time. I deleted them. They were upsetting, and I didn't want to keep that negativity on my phone. Miles and I looked at each other across the table. How convenient, I said loudly enough for her to hear. Is that her? Miles, why are you talking to her without me there? We agreed we'd handle this together. When did we agree that? Miles asked, his voice getting stronger. When did we agree that I couldn't talk to my own mother without your permission? That's not. You're twisting my words. The stress is making you paranoid. Am I? Or am I finally seeing clearly? Miles leaned toward the phone. Bellamy, why didn't you tell me my mother has been sending me money every month? Dead silence. Bellamy, that's not relevant to our marriage. $500 a month for 5 years isn't relevant. $30,000 isn't relevant. She was trying to control you with money. That's exactly what I was protecting you from. Miles looked at me, his eyes wide. Protecting me from what? From having a mother who cared enough to help me build my business? She's manipulating you right now. Can't you see that? She froze your accounts to force you to choose between her and me. That's emotional blackmail. And what do you call convincing me not to invite my own mother to my wedding? The line went quiet again. When Bellamy spoke, her voice was different, colder. Your mother is a bitter, lonely old woman who can't accept that you don't need her anymore. I was trying to help you break free from her toxic influence. Toxic influence, Miles repeated slowly. Like helping pay for my education? Like being there for every important moment in my life until I met you? Like sacrificing her own retirement to send me money every month? She was trying to keep you dependent on her. No, Miles said, his voice growing firmer. She was being a mother, and you convinced me that was somehow wrong. I could hear Bellamy's breathing on the other end of the line, quick and shallow. When she spoke again, her voice had shifted to something I recognized from our confrontation at the apartment. Manipulation, disguised as vulnerability. Miles, honey, you're not thinking clearly. The stress of this situation is making you see things that aren't there. Your mother is playing on your guilt, making you question our entire relationship over one misunderstanding. One misunderstanding? Miles laughed, but there was no humor in it. Bellamy, you systematically isolated me from my mother. You lied about her trying to contact you. You convinced me she was being invasive when she was actually giving us space. You made me believe that including her in our wedding would somehow damage our marriage. Because it would have. Look at what's happening right now. What's happening right now is the consequence of your lies, not my mother's actions. Miles, I'm coming home. We need to talk. Don't you dare hang up on me, Miles Harper. Don't you dare choose that woman over your wife. Miles looked at me, really looked at me. For the first time since I'd arrived in Texas, I saw recognition in his eyes, and regret, and something that might have been love. I'm not choosing anyone over anyone, Bellamy. I'm trying to figure out how I got to a place where I thought I had to choose it all. He hung up. We sat in silence for a moment. the weight of everything that had just been revealed settling between us like dust after an explosion. "Mom," Miles said finally, "I'm so sorry." I reached across the table and took his hand. It was bigger now than when he was a boy, but it still felt like my child's hand in mine. "I know, sweetheart. I don't know how this happened. I don't know how I let someone convince me that loving my mother was somehow wrong. You were manipulated by someone who's very good at it. It's not your fault. Isn't it?" His voice cracked. "I should have seen through it. I should have questioned why she was so eager to keep you away. I should have trusted my own instincts instead of letting her rewrite the history of our relationship." I squeezed his hand. "The important thing is that you see it now." Miles nodded, but his eyes were filled with tears. "She's pregnant, Mom." My heart stopped. "What?" "Bellamy's pregnant. She told me last week right before we left for our honeymoon. She said it was the perfect way to start our new life together. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. A grandchild. Another grandchild I might never get to know if Bellamy had her way. How far along? 2 months, maybe 3. Miles wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "She's already talking about moving away from Austin. Says she wants to raise the baby somewhere quieter, more family-oriented. But now I'm wondering if she just wants to get me even further away from you." The pieces of Bellamy's plan were becoming clear. The quick engagement, the secret wedding, the pregnancy, the planned move. She wasn't just trying to marry Miles. She was trying to completely reconstruct his life with herself at the center and everyone else pushed to the margins. "What are you going to do?" I asked. Miles stared out the diner window, watching the morning traffic flow past. "I don't know. I love her, Mom. At least I think I do. But I don't know if I love who she really is, or just the person she pretended to be. And the baby? The baby is innocent in all this. No matter what happens between Bellamy and me, that child deserves a father." He looked back at me. "And a grandmother, if you want to be." I felt tears welling up in my eyes. More than anything, Miles smiled for the first time since I'd arrived in Texas. It wasn't his old carefree smile, but it was real. "Then we'll figure it out. Somehow, we'll figure it out." But even as we sat there planning a tentative reconciliation, I knew this wasn't over. Bellamy wasn't the type to give up easily. She'd invested too much in her vision of the future to let it slip away without a fight, and pregnant women could be very, very dangerous when they felt cornered. Miles and I spent 2 hours in that diner, talking like we hadn't talked in years. Really talking. Not the superficial check-ins that our relationship had become. He told me about the business, about his fears and doubts, about how isolated he'd felt even while surrounded by Bellamy's version of happiness. I told him about the loneliness of the past few years, about how much I'd missed being part of his life, about the pride I felt watching him succeed even from a distance. By the time we left, we'd agreed on a few things. First, I would unfreeze his business accounts immediately. His employees didn't deserve to suffer because of family drama. Second, he would have an honest conversation with Bellamy about boundaries and respect. And third, we would rebuild our relationship slowly, carefully, with clear communication instead of assumptions. What we didn't agree on was what would happen if Bellamy refused to change. I unfroze the accounts from my phone while we walked to our cars. Miles watched over my shoulder as I navigated through the banking app, authorizing the release of funds. His relief was palpable. "Thank you," he said. "I know you didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did. This was never about money, Miles. It was about respect." He nodded, understanding finally dawning in his eyes. "I'll call you tonight, after Bellamy and I talk." I hugged him goodbye, holding on maybe a little longer than necessary. He felt solid and real in my arms, like the son I'd raised instead of the stranger he'd become. When we separated, there were tears in both our eyes. "I love you, Mom." "I love you too, sweetheart. More than you'll ever know." I watched him drive away, then sat in my rental car for a long time, trying to process everything that had happened. Part of me wanted to drive straight to the airport and fly home to Kansas. I'd accomplished what I came for. I'd reconnected with my son. But another part of me knew this wasn't over. Bellamy wasn't going to accept this new reality quietly. I was right. My phone rang at 6:30 that evening. Miles, his voice shaky and exhausted. "Mom, something's happened." My blood ran cold. "What's wrong?" Bellamy's in the hospital. She had some kind of episode. Started bleeding and having contractions. They think it might be a miscarriage. I closed my eyes, feeling a familiar weight settle in my chest. The weight of guilt that mothers carry, wondering if our actions somehow caused pain to ripple through our families in ways we never intended. Is she okay? She's stable now. The doctors think the baby is okay too, but she has to stay on bed rest for the next week. Miles paused. She's saying it's because of the stress, because of what happened today. Of course she was. Bellamy was many things, but she wasn't stupid. She knew exactly how to use this situation to her advantage, how to make Miles feel guilty for questioning her, how to position herself as the victim of his cruel mother's interference. Miles, I said carefully, I need you to listen to me. What happened today, our conversation, the truth coming out about her lies, that was emotionally stressful, yes. But emotional stress doesn't usually cause miscarriages. Most pregnancy complications happen because of factors that were already present. I know that logically, but she's making you feel responsible anyway. Silence. Then, yeah, that's what manipulators do, sweetheart. They take every situation and twist it to make themselves the victim and everyone else the villain. Don't let her rewrite what happened today. She wants me to cut contact with you again. Says it's the only way to protect the baby. I felt something cold and sharp settle in my stomach. And what do you want to do? Another long pause. I want to do what's right, but I don't know what that is anymore. Yes, you do. Deep down, you know. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Bellamy in that hospital bed, probably working every angle she could to regain control of the narrative. She'd use the pregnancy, the scare, the doctor's orders for bed rest. She'd position herself as the fragile victim who needed protection from the evil mother-in-law who'd caused all this trauma. And Miles, guilty and afraid, would probably let her. I was wrong about that, too. The next morning, Miles called while I was having coffee in the hotel lobby. I need to tell you something, he said without preamble. Last night, while Bellamy was sleeping, I went through her phone. Miles, I know it was wrong. I know I invaded her privacy, but I had to know the truth. His voice was steady now, determined. Mom, there were no deleted text messages from you, but there were plenty of other things. What kind of things? Messages to her friends about how she was managing the Miles situation. Screenshots she'd taken of my banking apps. She knew about the money you were sending me, knew about the business account, knew about everything. She'd been monitoring my finances for months. I felt sick. What else? Research. Detailed research about me, about you, about our family history. She had screenshots of your Facebook page going back 5 years. She knew about Dad's death, about your financial struggles, about every major event in our lives. She studied us, Mom, like we were a project. Oh, Miles, there's more. She's been in contact with her ex-husband, the one she divorced 2 years ago. They've been texting regularly throughout our entire relationship. What kind of texts? Nothing romantic, but strategic. He was giving her advice on how to handle me, how to isolate me from my support system. Apparently, she did the same thing to him, convinced him his family was toxic, moved him across the country, made him financially dependent on her. I closed my eyes. The pattern was becoming clear. Bellamy wasn't just manipulative. She was practiced. Miles wasn't her first victim. What are you going to do? I already did it. I moved out this morning while she was still at the hospital. Took my clothes, my laptop, my important papers. I'm staying at a hotel until I can figure out something more permanent. And the baby? If there is a baby, and if it's mine, I'll be a father to it. But I won't stay married to someone who's been lying to me since the day we met. His voice was firm, resolved. I'm filing for divorce, Mom. Miles, are you sure? This is a big decision. I'm sure. I've been thinking about it all night. And I'm sure. I'd rather be a single father than raise a child in a house built on lies and manipulation. 2 weeks later, I was back in Kansas, but everything felt different. Miles called me every few days, sometimes just to chat, sometimes to ask for advice about lawyers or apartments, or how to rebuild a life that had been carefully constructed around someone else's agenda. Bellamy had recovered from her hospital scare, if there had ever been a real scare to begin with. The divorce was proceeding, complicated by the pregnancy but moving forward nonetheless. She'd tried every manipulation tactic in her arsenal, Tears, threats, promises to change, claims that the stress would harm the baby. None of it worked. Miles had seen her clearly now, and once that kind of clarity hits, it's impossible to unsee. The most surprising development came 3 weeks after I returned home. Miles called with news that left me speechless. "The baby isn't mine," he said, his voice a mixture of relief and exhaustion. "The paternity test came back yesterday. It's her ex-husband's. How is that possible?" Apparently, their strategic texting included some in-person meetings I didn't know about. She was hedging her bets, keeping him as a backup plan while she worked on securing me. Miles laughed, but there was no humor in it. The whole pregnancy was just another layer of manipulation. "How are you feeling?" "Relieved, mostly." Guilty about feeling relieved, but relieved. It means I can make a clean break. No custody battles, no forced contact with her for the next 18 years. 6 months later, Miles moved back to Kansas. Not to live with me. We'd both learned the importance of healthy boundaries, but to a small town about an hour away where he could start over, rebuild his business, reconnect with the life he'd had before Bellamy rewrote it. We have dinner every Sunday now. Sometimes he cooks, sometimes I do, sometimes we just order pizza and watch old movies. It's not the same as it was when he was a child. It's better. We talk as equals now, as adults who've both made mistakes and learned from them. Last month he met someone new, Sarah, a local teacher who's kind and genuine and has never once suggested that his relationship with his mother is inappropriate. She came to dinner last Sunday, and afterward, as we were cleaning dishes, she said something that made my heart sing. "You raised a good man, Colleen. He talks about you all the time, about how much he respects you, how grateful he is for everything you sacrificed for him." I looked at Miles, who was drying dishes at the sink, and felt a peace I hadn't experienced in years. He was himself again, the thoughtful, caring, genuine person I'd raised him to be, the person Bellamy had tried so hard to mold into something else. "He is a good man," I agreed. "He just forgot for a while." That night, as I was getting ready for bed, I thought about Bellamy. I wondered if she was still trying to manipulate her ex-husband back into her life, or if she'd moved on to a new target. I wondered if she ever reflected on the damage she'd caused, or if she was even capable of that kind of self-awareness. But mostly, I felt sorry for her, because in trying to create the perfect life by controlling everyone around her, she'd missed out on the most important thing of all: genuine love. The kind that doesn't need to be manufactured or manipulated. The kind that exists between a mother and son who found their way back to each other. The kind that survives even the worst storms, because it's built on truth instead of lies. I sleep better now. The worry that used to keep me awake, the fear that I'd lost my son forever, has been replaced by a quiet confidence. We'd both learned valuable lessons from the Bellamy experience. Miles had learned to trust his instincts and value authentic relationships. I'd learned that sometimes love means fighting back instead of quietly accepting mistreatment. And together, we'd learned that family isn't something that can be broken by one person's manipulation. Real family bonds bend under pressure, but they don't break. They just wait patiently until it's safe to be strong again. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.